Today, I'm speaking to a very interesting person about the notion of behavioral science, which is very, very integral part of all design. And everything that we do these days is somehow infused with some sort of behavioral science. But before we go into the topic, Giorgia, please let us know who are you?
Cool. Hi, Jason. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Giorgia Prestento, and I think given the team, I'll introduce myself and my purpose. So my purpose is to inspire people to take an alternative perspective. I think my background is in change management. I've been working with lots of companies, different types of projects internationally. And change management is about bringing change, inspiring people to do things differently. And my interest has always been around people. That brought me to behaviors. I did a master's in behavioral science. I explored much more the decision-making side, especially the group dynamics when, the behaviors when people are in a group and they want to take a decision. So what I do kind of day to day, I work with executives. I help them to achieve, their goals using behavioral interventions and also how to optimize decision-making.
Awesome. And so what would you say is the purpose of behavioral science and this whole kind of decision-making processes in let's say today's companies? And perhaps tell us a little bit about how that maybe has changed over the years. Are we seeing any changes happening in the kind of utilization of behavioral sciences?
Okay, cool. Good question to start.
They'll go straight into the deep end.
So behavioral science, I think that's what it just fits in terms of the purpose, is how do we make more successful change? I think traditionally the change is being imposed on people, while really without understanding what makes people tick. What's the behaviors, how we try to change it. And this is where, behavioral interventions come in, how do we make it more successful? Just in case somebody's not familiar with the whole topic, so behavioral science is very much a mixture of economics, psychology, primarily, then you throw in a little bit of neuroscience and just, anthropology. And probably, again, anybody not familiar, probably you heard of two specific writers, Daniel Kahneman. So he wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. I think it's back in 2002 now, won a Nobel Prize. And also Richard Thaler of Nudge. I think we've all heard about this thinking, fast and slow, conscious, subconscious, nudges, they come up on the news as well sometimes. And I think the way it started, and I think this is where it's different from the typical way of doing things. My first degree was actually in economics. So they're thinking, it's all about, maximizing utility for people, maximizing profit companies. And then you realize, even while I was studying, that people, they're not like that. We don't actually maximize the utility. Say, for example, winter is cold, you want to buy, a proper winter jacket. And if you just think about your utility, you can spend like £50 and it keeps you warm. And instead, people go out and buy jackets that are £500. So, from an economist point of view, you think this just doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
And then, looking at the behavior, the psychology, you just buy for for a number of reasons, but nothing that's purely economics. Organizations the same. You have maximizing profit, but, if you actually assess the way that companies are organized, sometimes they do things that actually they're not for that purpose. And behavioral science help us understand a little bit more why people do the things that they do.
One of the things that I've kind of come across, which caught my attention a lot, is the whole behavioral economics thing, and specifically the book Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. Talk to us a little bit about people. Are people really predictably irrational? How do you look at people as a behavioral scientist?
We are. The example of the jacket, that's irrational. You just think, why would you do something that actually is not, good enough for you? And I think it's just how you measure rationality as well. I think what happens, we are driven a lot by our subconscious, the immediate decision, the kind of things that spring to mind, rather than the rational part of our brain. And I think that's where the irrationality comes in. And I found that in a lot of change programs. I had a lot of clients, they said it's logical why people don't do it. And the reason that they don't do it is that something is missing. And most of the time is because the change is imposed, because they're not involved, because they don't understand the rationale for change. And I think it's just, that's considered irrational, but at the same time, having worked in change, I think you think, well, you just need to help people through that journey. And that's one of the things that always interests me more in the work I've been doing, that just people reaction, both from the side of, helping the executives understand what are the implications of the change, but also, how do you make sure that people actually are involved in the change, they understand it, and things are communicated properly. And behavioral science is about understanding, what people do, why, and what influences them. I mean, in programs, one of the examples and one of, key parts of, what we use in behavioral science is the role of the messenger. And we all know we tend to listen to people that we trust, people that are experts, but also very importantly, people that we feel they are like us. Something that we can relate to. Sometimes, and the message sometimes is given by somebody only because he has that job title, rather than somebody that actually can relate to people. And I think it's, now when we started, we see all around the vaccinations and everything like that, notice that there are some people, actors, famous people that actually go out and just give that message. And some of them, very well, they'll just make it, they explain it as, I'm like you. I'm an older person, relate to me. And I decided to make this choice, just to encourage other people to do it.
So in terms of the systems, then, you use the word change. And when you say change, and I've been involved in so many different change projects, do you see change as a systems change or change as a broader aspect? How do you see the role of systems in behavioral change?
Again, it just depends on your definition of system, because this system is anything, is more like a process. A lot of people think system like a machine. To me, it's just a process. And to me, just the process is, the steps that you use to do something. So, for example, in behavioral change, there are different types of interventions, or, for example, just changing a little bit around decision-making, all the steps in the process to actually make sure that you optimize, your decision. And one of the key things that, when I started, studying decision science, it was decisions that are about the process, not the outcome. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's just something that really, a few years ago, really hit me, because you can't control the outcome. The only thing that you can do is you can control the process. Let's say, for example, December 2019, a company that has this amazing, strategy, everything ready, and then, they can't implement it because the world has changed so much. So the externalities come in, and then they could not, implement that strategy. So the outcome is a failure in a way, but they followed the right process. So you can't say that the decision was bad. They did all the right things. It's just the external world didn't go according to plan. And that's why, we just stress so much the importance of the process and just following the steps.
Yeah, this is actually, it took me a few seconds to actually clock onto what you were saying. You can't control the outcome, but you can control the process. Sounds like almost a trivial thing to say, but actually it's very profound. And I want to repeat that. You can't control the outcome, but you can control the process. And that is the power of systems that we found. For example, last year, my colleague Mo and I kind of ended up fractalizing what we call the fractal management, like breaking everything down into tiny little units of work and being able to control that process. And it impacted so much on the outcomes beyond all our imagination. But we realized very early on that we couldn't exactly what you said. We couldn't could impact it. We couldn't control the outcome, but we could very much control the process. And that was the most important thing that we did.
So we notice as well, people tend to take a decision. Literally, we say they jump to a conclusion. They make a decision. And, most of the time, just because, he ends up, some problem down the line because they didn't spend enough time in the process. So how I call my decision starter kit, which is like 5 steps. And the first one is actually define the problem and the decision. And it's not always straightforward because then, you need, and I ask people, just sit down, just get somebody to review it, challenge it, until you understand, what the real problem is. You can't take, it's useless to even think about the decision. I think your example, it was exactly to the point.
When it comes to then innovation, what is the role of behavioral change in innovation and even sort of making decisions around innovation? Because what you said just there around, it's not even clear what the problem is. And so this jumping to conclusions is certainly doesn't work. I mean, we've had it just even earlier on in the workshop today, where people are like, let's just make a bunch of decisions around what we want to do. And it's like, hold on. Like nobody here understands what we're doing at all. So we will potentially be able to make decisions once we understand what we're doing and why. Before that, let's just not jump. So how does this play into the realm of innovation?
I think you just answer, the question. It's just about, doing things in a different way. Again, just getting that different perspective. And to me, the innovation is actually sometimes it's about slowing down, which I think you just say, it's the opposite, because innovation is supposed to be fast. But indecision is about, okay, let's define the problem first. Let's get the data. Let's come up with lots of options, like really lots. And then we'll just sort of take the next step, a short list. And then, and then you're ready to take a decision. I mean, making a decision is my step number 5. People say, oh my God, you're going to waste time. But I think you gain it because by that time, you know what you're doing. You have the right data, you have governance and process in place.
Yeah, this is totally what I totally vibe with. And it's unbelievable to what extent people want to move fast and then they fail all the time that way. And sooner or later they might, if the company hasn't gone completely broken down and unsalvageable, they kind of then say, actually, we need to slow down to move faster. And so when it comes to then products and perhaps product design and things like that, or even product decisions, what can you say about behavioral sciences in the products field?
Yeah, I think I answered this with an example, which is probably one of my favorites, and is, Pixar.
My favorite.
I know. So traditionally, what happened with this, in this film industry, especially, with just cartoons, you had like an executive. It tends to be like the older guy and just say, let's make a film about just people getting lost or fishes or princesses. And then you just give it to somebody to write the story. Then they just chuck it along the fence to somebody that actually writes the dialogue. Again, they just move it across, or somebody that actually draw the pictures or whatever you do. And I think the innovation, and I think there's so much behavior in that Pixar did, it just put everybody together, and often what I find in companies that want to innovate, the real, the solution, the products that you become more successful, it's just because you change the environment. And so much of behavioral science is just looking at the context. So, people behave in a certain way based on the context. So if you told them, this is your task, you need to write a script, this is what you do. If instead you change the context and you put the screenwriter with the designer, with just somebody doing the drawing, somebody production in the same room, you will see behaviors change. And I think, and they become more innovative because they start talking a different way. They become more creative. They start sort of looking at things that before they thought, that's not possible. But because the somebody's there say, oh yeah, I can make this image move in a certain way. And I think this is one of the good things about understanding human behaviors and just looking at the context and how you can actually use those two to create better products and better services. I mean, there's just tons of examples everywhere.
Yeah, it's kind of a bizarre thing in respect to Disney. Originally, that Disney kind of industrial process of making cartoons involved that men were allowed to draw pictures and women were only allowed to color them in, which is quite a bizarre thing. And then at Pixar, as you were saying, but there's something even more profound about Pixar where I'm not sure if you've come across this, the Pixar theory, where each Pixar movie actually resides in one giant universe of narratives that all interconnect. And so slowly but surely they're like revealing what that is and how it all kind of came about. And it's even sort of profound more around sort of rise of consciousness across things and animals and humans and so on. And even some levels of transhumanism.
Yeah, you can only achieve that level of creativity and just looking at all these different ideas because you have more people in the room and you just bring more diversity, people feel included, and you just come up with just this variety of idea and concepts and the shared purpose that gives those amazing films that they do.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting thing again about Disney, because Disney, even though he had this kind of male chauvinist kind of approach to the splitting of the work, he also had an approach where he allowed and welcomed everyone within Disney company to suggest ideas to, and for example, they say that Mickey Mouse Fantasia movie, where Mickey Mouse is kind of battling with a broom and stuff like that, actually was recommended by a cleaner in the Disney company who had recommended that, and they kind of worked up the movie from there. So it's kind of strange way in which people are thinking there. And so when it comes to money, then what is impact of behavioral science on money? And this is such a for many people, money is quite a nebulous concept as well. It looks like most people don't really understand money, certainly this kind of postmodern fiat currencies and how it really works, and concepts of cash flow and what is worth what and all that kind of stuff. But what can you say about money and behavioral science?
Well, I always think about money as lost opportunity. So if you don't implement a change properly, if it takes you too long to take a decision, that costs money. The problem we have is just people don't tend to measure this. So you don't really, it's like an opportunity cost. You don't understand what you're losing if you're not measuring it. I mean, there's very little research done in this one. There's something I came across where they looked at time lost. They survey, a lot of, executives, and they were just saying, well, we spent about 40% of our time in meetings making decisions. And like half of the time, I mean, it's just ineffective. I mean, we're not getting anywhere. I may say probably because they don't have a good process in place. So if you just look at an average company, it was an American survey, so a normal Fortune 500 company. So they just started working out. So this is like 500,000 hours of working days lost. And just if you start just making some calculation, they say, well, maybe there was like something as much as $250 million wasted on labor costs per year. And this is just, if you start, even in a smaller organization, I think a couple of times I did it, just start writing down how much time people spent in decision meetings and, just some average, daily cost, and you start saying, okay, we are wasting a lot of money, but also time and motivation, and just this feeling that you're not contributing to something. And, I wish there was more research. I do a little bit of research, but you just need, literally quite, a very large sample. But I think there is something in there for me about, using those insights to do things more efficiently.
Yeah, it made me think a lot about the sort of, there's sometimes, and it's partly right, partly wrong, statement of time is money. But certainly for anyone who works as a kind of time-based consultant or freelancer, certainly time is money if you're charging per hour. But even if you're not charging per hour, as you just described, time is money in the sense that that loss of opportunity is huge, because that time could be utilized towards more productive and money making actually activities within the company, or even just in general life of individual humans. And so when it comes to growth, tell us what's your take on growth? How do you even view that? Because like I just sort of make a remark here that postmodern capitalism has been kind of geared around growth. And at the moment, we have this kind of superbly weird and bizarre situation of so many companies rushing into IPOs. There's all these kind of SPACs, which are like corroborated companies that just go in IPO, and it's like grow fast, raise money, fund. There's no real kind of thinking, holistic thinking. What are we actually doing here? So what's your take on growth?
Yeah, the way I look at, by using behavioral intervention, you get a more organic and a more natural growth. So it's not like just this big bang, big system, restructure the whole organization. But same as in example, a little bit of Pixar, it's just a small tweaks. So what you do, you change the environment, you change the incentives, social norms. You just make some small changes it could be, and I always like to start small. You start in a team, in a department, you measure it, see if it works, and then you expand it. While, traditional change programs, or let's do the same thing to everybody, it doesn't matter if it's 100,000 people. And, it may work or it may not, but if you just sort of start little pockets, see how it goes, then you test it. And I think we don't test enough, some of these interventions, and behavioral science is a science. So we like measuring things, see, does it work? Would it translate? Can you apply it to something else? And that's why it gives a growth that is more sustainable to me, just because there's a lot of thinking that goes in there as well.
Yeah, it's basically like what are people naturally looking to do next, something like that, and designing and plugging into that, as opposed to trying to force a behavior that otherwise a human just doesn't want to do, something like that, right?
It is, because we never do things that we are told to do. Since we are kids, somebody tells you to do something, you'll just say, I just don't. But if you just if there is an involvement, if you make it easy, and that's the other thing probably I should have just stressed the importance of, you have to make it easy for people to do it. Even things, one of the famous examples is, pension. So when they started, the pension, it was to opt out rather than opt in. People by default, they joined the company pension because it was easier. So you don't have to think. Human beings, we don't want to think too much, especially if it's something as complicated as I need to choose a pension. But somebody, if it's just say, oh, this is already done for you, you can decide whether to cancel it. Just because we are irrational and lazy, we don't tend to do. And this is just, again, a nudge. And it's just something that changes behaviors by just making, what is a good behavior essentially, which is, thinking about the future, making it easy for us.
It's interesting you say, we're irrational and lazy. It's effectively true, 100% true, yet it can often be sort of borderline politically incorrect to say, yet like we got to work with what is true. In many respects, like human life is like a calorie game. So humans kind of want to do what takes less calories to execute, because typically biologically calories went just like free flow of food and energy and so on. So kind of our brains tend to kind of want to do the easier thing to save calories. So that's a kind of, and you look at lions in the jungle, they kind of laze around quite a lot, because otherwise they'd be wasting a lot of calories and just kind of running around and so on. You never know where your next meal is coming from. And it come, when it will come, and so on. So that's kind of all, it all makes sense. But most people don't really necessarily think about it that way. Are there any kind of overall company points that you would like to make in terms of, companies out there that are looking to utilize behavioral science and this kind of decision making approaches that you are so good at? What would you say about that?
I'd rather not name any specific companies, but I think that the good news is that there is more of that going on. I mean, quite interesting, behavioral science has been used a lot in government, especially in the US and the UK, the nudge unit here, and the private sector lags a little bit behind. And I think by now, quite a few companies that have their own, behavioral unit, inside, there are some insurance companies, some banks, some, some consumer ones as well. And, there's more interest. I mean, one of the things that I do, I just co-founded a community, which is called Thank Goodness is Monday. And we have, I know, and we have, just events every 2 months, which are really about, for people and with people that want to bring behavioral interventions into the workplace. Yeah, if anybody wants to attend, is every 2 months on a Monday, most of the time.
That's amazing. And I think this whole kind of realm of behavioral science is still quite a sort of fringe thing, yet it impacts on everything we do. I was even just recently watching, because I've got a teenage son, I started having this kind of like adult to adolescent friction with him. And I started thinking like, right, so somebody must have written a whole ton of books on this. And then we plucked up a presentation from a guy who wrote a book about this. And he made a statement eventually. He goes, well, probably most of you have a situation where your son or daughter wants you to buy them a pair of shoes that cost like 350 to 500 pounds, and they're just they're crying, they say, oh, this means the world to me, and so on. And he goes, basically, I've got news for you. The emotion that they're experiencing is not real. Okay, so but you can accept the emotion, but you don't have to buy the shoes. So I started playing this thing with my son where he goes, I really need these shoes, blah, blah. And I would hug him and say, all right, my son, I really feel your pain. I accept your emotion, but I'm not buying the shoes.
Fascinating. The other thing that I've just been experimenting on my niece, you just say, oh, I don't want to go to bed, I don't want to wear a pajama, I don't want this. And I'll just say, okay, do you want the blue one or do you want the red one? And just suddenly she's on the driving seat. Oh, I choose this one, and she wears it. My brother looks at me just saying I'm genius, which makes me feel good. Yeah. And, again, because it's just giving people, a choice.
And reducing that overhead of having to decide, that like decision fatigue.
I know. And also because sometimes one of the problems that we have, especially in society these days, we have too much choice.
Exactly.
You just go there, they're like, 100 types of cereals, like literally is overwhelming. So, anything we want to buy, so it's just a matter, and it's part of, decision sciences. So how do we narrow down? And that's why we follow experts. Yeah. You'll just say, okay, this person knows about TV. I'm just going to narrow it down using his opinion. So I have 5 to choose from rather than 50.
So it's a combination of choice paralysis followed by decision fatigue, followed by usually people not doing anything. Dropping into that lazy state as you described.
Yeah, that's why we need a process.
Exactly. Right. Giorgia, it's been fascinating speaking to you. Is there anything else that you would like to, point people to other than thanks goodness it's Monday?
If anybody's interested, of course, in the work I do in decisions, I have a website which is called like me, which is giorgiaprestento.com. Also, I do blogs every Friday. I have a blog related to decision. I also write longer articles where I kind of, explore some of the topics related to behaviors and decision a little bit more depth. So you're welcome to read those, get in touch, give me your comments.
Awesome, fantastic. And of course, for anybody else who's looking for a kind of software solution that helps make decisions across a whole company, our Anya software, design company software, is ready to be used on meetanya.com. So you're welcome to check that out as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And Giorgia, thank you so much for being our guest. This has been fantastic conversation.
Well, thank you so much.